few years ago, I bought this beautiful quilted fabric with hearts on it, and the time has finally come to use it for a project. I'm going to sew the Greta jacket. And in this video, you'll follow along with me step by step through each stage of the sewing process. The pattern I'm going to use to sew the jacket in this video is the Greta jacket pattern, a jacket designed for quilted fabrics. It comes in two versions, and in this video, I'm going to sew the version without a collar and with oversized pockets. To sew this jacket, I'm going to use a fabric that's already quilted, but among our YouTube videos, you can find another one where I sewed the jacket by quilting the fabric myself. The truth is that this makes the task a lot easier. I just have to cut out the pattern pieces for both the outer fabric and the lining. This fabric doesn't actually need a lining as such, but I wanted the jacket to be a different color on the outside and inside. For the lining of this jacket, I'm going to use a sky blue cotton poplin. Starting with the sewing process, I'm going to sew the back pieces first. I'll place both pieces right sides together and sew the center back seam. I'll press the seam open. The sleeve pattern consists of 3 pieces to create that beautiful rounded shape at the elbow. We'll join the 3 pieces, adjusting the curve at the seam and sewing a top stitch along the seam allowance. I'm going to press the seams toward the back, and in the case of the front, toward the armpit. Since this fabric can be damaged by contact with the iron, I'll place a piece of cotton in between so it doesn't come into direct contact with direct heat. Once we've sewn the 2 back pieces of the sleeve together, we'll join the front to create that tubular shape. For now, we'll set aside the sleeve pieces for later and start sewing the pocket, which consists of 3 pieces. The outer piece, the lining, and a gathered ruffle. You can easily make this gathered ruffle using the rectangular piece included in the pattern by folding it in half and gathering it. We'll adjust the size of the gathered section to fit the entire curved area of the pocket. We'll place the pieces right sides together with the gathered piece in between. We'll sew a stitch along the entire curved area, extending slightly into the straight section. Always leaving a gap so you can turn the piece right side out. At the top, fold the seam allowance toward the inside of the pocket and close that small section by hand. With the pocket finished, we'll place it on top of the front piece, positioning the top according to the pattern marks. Pin the entire surface of the pocket so it doesn't move, and sew a top stitch along the outline. You can sew a top stitch following the curved shape and sewing over the pocket itself, in which case the top stitch will be visible. Or sew the top stitch right along the seam, lightly sewing over the gathers. If you do this in a color similar to that of the gathers, the stitching will be practically invisible. Now we'll join the front and back along the side and shoulder seams, placing the pieces right sides together, sewing along the seam allowance and pressing them open, just as we always do. We'll take the sleeves and join the armhole circumference. We'll start by matching the side seam of the bodice with the armhole notch on the sleeve. And then we'll match the rest of the notches along the sleeve's edge by placing both pieces right sides together. It's a fairly large shape, so it shouldn't be too difficult. Carefully press the seam toward the sleeve. The outer jacket is finished. Now we have to repeat these same steps to create the lining, but omitting the pocket. To finish, we have to attach the lining to the jacket. We're going to place the lining wrong side out and insert it inside the jacket itself. The pieces will be positioned in their final place, that is, wrong sides together. We align the entire outline of the jacket. It's a very simple process because we're going to finish the jacket's edge with a bias binding. In this case, I've cut a bias tape about 4 centimeters wide from the same fabric I used for the lining, so the color matches. If you can't cut a very long strip, try joining several strips together until you reach the length you need. From here on, we'll simply sew the tape like a standard bias tape along the edge of our jacket. If you don't know how to sew this type of tape, don't worry, I've included a link to our blog in the description box. You may have noticed that my jacket doesn't have a visible stitch on the bias tape, and that's because I did the second stitch entirely by hand. Just as we did along the entire edge of the jacket, we'll also finish the cuff with a bias binding. This area is a little more complicated because it's so small. And now, to finish up, all that's left is to sew the laces to close the jacket. These rectangular pieces are also included in the pattern. We'll fold them right sides together and stitch along the entire length in one of the ends. However, the other end must be left open so that the tape can be turned inside out later. Use a blunt stick to push the fabric and turn the entire strip inside out. Press the entire edge of the strip and finish the remaining end by folding the seam allowance inward. We'll sew the strip to the jacket right at its center. You can do this with a machine stitch or by hand if you want the back to be completely seamless, like mine. And with that, we've finished sewing this version of the Greta jacket.